I'm here with Frank Filipetti, who's kind enough to stop by and spend some time with us here at the Sanken Microphone Chromatic Series booth. Frank, tell us about your Sanken microphone collection.
I had always known about Sanken microphones, but I started with the CU44X. When I first heard it, I fell in love with it. I consequently purchased 4 of them for my use, and then those worked out so well, I purchased an additional 2, and those are kind of my go-to mics on Broadway shows, because as much as I'd love to use a really old Neumann U47 or something like that, one, they're not totally reliable, and on a Broadway show, I need reliability, but 2, as it turns out, singers are actually preferring it because it doesn't quite have that presence boost at the top, and it does have a little more meat at the bottom. So I just connect 4 or 5 of those on every Broadway show for the main singers. Once I got exposed to that, I realized how much I loved that dual transducer thing, and then they came out with the CU55, which is kind of a smaller version of the 44, and I've got about 4 or 5 of those, and I love those as drum overheads. I love them on a woodwind section. We did the whole woodwind section for 200 Motels, right, with the LA Philharmonic. We had 8 of those CU55s, phenomenal microphone. Small footprint. I love the color because it's not black, it's not silver, and it's very easy to hide when you're doing a live video. Many times the directors and so forth don't want to see microphones, and this kind of brown color that the microphone sits in the case makes it very easy to put them in the position you want while not getting in the way of the director's vision.
So you also have some omni mics, CU100Ks.
Oh, the 100Ks.
So what kind of projects have you used all these microphones on?
On 200 Motels, I think personally I have 5 matched 100Ks, and that was my main orchestra usually. And I set them up, so I do an LCR in the rear and then the tree in the front, and those are my main 5, but then I think on 200 Motels we also had 2 outboard, because you brought a couple extras, so I had those for my wide left and right, and I'd say 80 to 90% of the orchestra came from those mics. What I love about those mics is the frequency response is extended certainly well beyond audibility, but on top of that, they have the smoothest top end and a really large, not peaked, but robust low end. And anyone that's gotten into using omnis, and I think the longer you do this, the more you start reaching for an omni or a figure 8 rather than a cardioid, you start to get more natural sounding instruments. And the 100K is just phenomenal. So that was done on 200 Motels. I used the same setup for Bocelli at Central Park, and all my Broadway shows now, the main room mics have been the C100Ks, and then I use the Sankens from everything from vocals. The CU44s are the vocal mics, but if I can squeeze one in to put on the bass, I do that as well.
Well, your first project with 100K was Korn, wasn't it?
Yes, I used the 100Ks, that's right, and I put them in front of some of the guitar amps. I think it was Monkey's guitar amp and Head's guitar amp, and it blew us away because we had been using either ribbons or dynamics really close, but I even tried it on his vocal and it sounded great on that. I mean, a lot of people don't use omnis for things like vocals, especially when your singer is alone in the room doing a vocal overdub. You certainly have control over the pattern of mic you use. And I'm saying to people, open up those mics, try a singer on an omni. You would be surprised at what it sounds like.
So how would you describe Sanken microphones versus some of your other choices? Everybody has a palette of choices.
My favorite microphones right now are made in Japan. I know it's weird, and I know the Germans still make great microphones, and I love them, but if you're working in an analog medium, remember those microphones were kind of made for that medium. They have
Right.
the rising presence peak.
Right.
They have a certain characteristic that works especially well with tape. But I don't work with tape. And that characteristic that works well with tape, I don't necessarily love when I'm going to Pro Tools or to Cubase or whatever it is. I suggest rather than going to the old microphones, and I know tube mics carry a very kind of aura with people, but I have to tell you, the presence peak and a lot of the distortions that were masked on the analog tape are not masked on the digital world. And a lot of times when people talk about digital sounding harsh or digital, they're using mics made for tape rather than mics that are made for the modern era. And I say if you're going digital, try out the new mics, because I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with that lack of buildup in that high mid frequency that tends to make digital sound digital.
Right.
I almost always tend towards the newer microphones now when I'm doing digital work.
So for you, what are you working on these days? What projects you have coming up?
Well, I have a very interesting project that was recorded in India, in Mumbai, and I'm doing a 9/1 mix of that. I just finished The Color Purple on Broadway, Tuck Everlasting on Broadway, and I've been working with a couple of new artists and working on their material. Right now, I couldn't be happier, and again, a lot of my work is mixing, but my favorite thing to do is record a bunch of musicians in a room, and the Sanken microphones allow me to do that.